We added the manifest.json file in the last video. Now how can we fill it with life? There are a couple of properties we can add to this JSON file. For example, the name property. This allows us to assign a name to our progressive web application. Now, our web application, of course, already has a title between these title tags in our index.html file. But the name is something special. The name will be fetched and used by the browser in various places. For example, on a splash screen we get once we added the app to the home screen. And I will show you this in a second, of course. Besides the name, we can also specify a short name. This is basically the, shortened version of our full name, and it is the name which is shown below the app icon. So basically the browser will use this name whenever the space for the name is limited. Now we can also specify a start URL, which basically means which page should get loaded on startup when we tap this app icon. Now, this does not mean that if we visit this page, let's say via Google, on a given URL which links to a specific blog post, that we wouldn't load that post. We do. It just means once we added the application to our home screen, what do we actually load if the user taps the home screen icon? And you specify a path to a given page here. In this case, /index.html would load the root index.html file in the public folder in our course project. We also can specify a scope. Now this means which pages are included in our, let's call it PWA, Progressive Web App experience. So here, a dot simply means all the pages in our web folder, so in the public folder here, are included. If we would only specify a subfolder, let's say the help folder, that would mean that for every other page, the browser will not use the settings we set up here in the JSON file. So if we specify a certain icon we want to use, the browser will only use that for the pages which are part of the scope and not for the other ones. It's pretty common to set the scope to the full page though, but theoretically you could limit it to a certain part of your application, so that only a part of your application is the progressive web application in the end. We also have the display property. Now display allows us to define how the app should actually load once it was added to the home screen. Standalone means it looks like a full app and we don't see the browser controls at the top. We don't see the URL bar and so on. Now I'll come back to the different options you have here once I show it in our application. But standalone is the default choice or the typical choice you want to make here, because this really makes your application look like a native app. And if you would choose the other option, which basically just opens it in the browser again, it doesn't look like that. Still, you have a choice here. You can also choose the background color. This is the color it will display at the back of your application whilst it is loading, and for example on the splash screen. So on this loading screen it shows while loading. So this is simply something which is only shown a fraction of the time, but it allows you to make sure that you control this short period of time. And as you can see, you pass a hexadecimal code here to specify any color of your choice. Besides the background color, you can also set a theme color. Now this controls how, for example, your toolbar at the top will look like, especially on a native device in the task switcher. This makes sure that your application, since it might be loaded standalone, really looks like a native app by also controlling the color it has in, again, for example, the task switcher. And of course, I will show you how to add all these properties in the next lectures. You can also set up a description. This description is, for example, used when you save your application as a favorite in the browser. So whenever the browser wants an additional description to use, it will fall back to this field here. It won't be used in a lot of places, but that might always change in the future. And again, whenever the browser needs some description of your app, it will use this field. So make sure you pass a short description here about what your app is. And keep in mind that the user will in the end see this description. So write a description which should be visible or which should be applicable to your users. You can also add a direction, a dir property. Here it's set to left to right, which is the default. You could set it to right to left. If you have a web application which is aiming at countries where you read right to left, you could specify it here so that the browser knows it and loads it appropriately. It's the same category for the lang property here. Here you can set the default or main language of your application with this 4-letter country code. Now, this is also useful for the browser so that it can identify how to load your app and for whom your application actually is. It doesn't have any deeper implications than that, but for your browser, it's important metadata. You also have an orientation property. Here you can basically control in which orientation your web app should be opened if you tap the home screen icon. So portrait primary means that you prefer portrait mode, and of course the same is available for landscape. And again, I will show these options in the next lectures. This allows you to basically ensure that users are viewing the app the way you want them to view them. But keep in mind, restricting the orientation is something you want to use with care, because typically users don't like being restricted there. So if you have a chance of basically supporting both portrait and landscape, please do so. It's typically the better choice. We also got icons, and I'll handle this on a new slide because it's rather long. Icons in the end simply allows us to configure a set of icons where the browser will choose the best fitting one, so best fitting for the given device density or screen density and so on. And icons, for example, are used obviously on the home screen, the icon which is displayed there, but also in some other places. Now, how do we configure these icons then? Icons looks like that. It's an array of various JavaScript or JSON objects here. And each object specifies a source. This simply is a path to the icon in your web folder, so in the public folder in our course project. Then the type, here it's a PNG icon and we specify that MIME type here. And then the size of the icon. And you typically provide multiple icons, so always the same icon from what you see on, but different sizes. The browser then chooses the best icon with the best size for a given device. So obviously if you have a high density device with a big screen, you want to have a bigger icon than on a, let's say, iPhone 3, which is very old and doesn't have that good of a screen resolution. So again, specify a set of icons here. Make sure to at least have a 48 by 48 sized icon. Also having 128 by 128 is good. And go all the way up to 512 to 512. And you will see this in the next lectures, to also support very big devices. And also, since the icon is displayed on the splash screen, make sure that the splash screen looks good on these devices too. Finally, there's one other important property you can set, related applications. Here you can basically set up, well, related applications, native applications, and that's the important part. Not web applications, native applications the user might be interested in installing for your app. So if you have, for example, a web app where you also have a real native app as an alternative, you might specify it here, and then the browser can choose if he wants to display this choice to the user. The related applications also is an array of related applications, where each application is simply an object where you specify the platform, like Play for the Google Play Store, then the URL to your app in that store, and possibly an ID, so that it can be identified in that store. And as for all the properties, you find a detailed link or a link with detailed instructions on all these given properties at the end of the module. So these are the main properties you want to know. Now that's a lot of theory. Let's now add them to our project and let's configure our application in a way that we can actually add it to the home screen and have a nice display.